Coming up on our newscast tonight. With less than a couple of weeks left before the hotly anticipated Pyongyang-Washington summit, select venues in Vietnam that are likely involved in hosting the event, like hotels and convention halls, are shrouded in secrecy and have upgraded security. President Moon Jaein expresses determination to reform the nation's most powerful government bodies. To ensure a tighter checks and balance system, he calls for greater parliamentary support in overhauling agencies like the National Intelligence Service, the prosecution, and the National Police Agency. The nation's monthly report on the economy is released. In the latest edition, the Ministry of Finance expresses concerns over exports, with the volume sliding for second straight months in January. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, coming to you live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Che. Vietnam's foreign minister and protocol chief wrapped up their visit to North Korea, and now we're expecting the two negotiating sides and the host country to put their summit preparations into higher gear. To get updated on the situation, let's go straight to our Lee Ji-won standing by over in Hanoi. Ji-won, what do you have for us at this hour?
Daniel, we've been to a number of hotels where the leaders are expected to stay during their summit in 2 weeks' time. And though, while it's still unannounced, we've seen some signs of preparations. For example, JW Marriott Hotel, where President Donald Trump is expected to stay, was filled with preparations for the arrival of a high-profile guest. There were holes dug around the hotel, possibly to plant more trees, and there was a major cleanup of the surrounding gardens. Now, the reception says rooms are fully booked as they have a big team staying over during that period, but they didn't give us any more details. And it seems security has gotten a bit tight, especially when we tried to film the hotel. We were approached by hotel personnel telling us that we cannot film the hotel with our camera, but only with our phones to go inside. Now, meanwhile, earlier in the day, we were over at the Sofitel Legend Metropole Hanoi, one of the possibilities for Kim Jong-un's hotel. That's around 10 kilometers away from JW Marriott. The security there was much more lax, but they were also not taking any reservations from February 25th to 28th. When I asked them, they said the rooms are almost full and also that they have, quote, delegations staying. When I tried to confirm if they mean that the North Korean delegation will be staying at the hotel, the reception said it's confidential.
Okay, then, Ji-won, how about the summit venue? I understand we have a very strong candidate.
You're right, Daniel. The Vietnam National Convention Center is where many of us are speculating to be the summit venue. That's where the 2006 APEC economic leaders meeting and the 2010 ASEAN summit were held. Now, it's really just a 5-minute walk from JW Marriott, but the security was much tighter. All roads leading to the center were blocked, and we weren't even allowed to walk past the street next to it. But this may not be necessarily due to the summit, as locals say it's normally a high security area. Now, another place where we saw lots of surveillance was the North Korean embassy. While we couldn't see any significant preparations, there was a new sign in front saying no entrance, and the guards in front of the gate were watching us with keen eyes. The North Korean officials also blocked windows with a cover, something that wasn't there a few weeks ago. Now, it's reported that according to a local police officer, the embassy had been designated as a special security area by the Vietnamese police earlier this week. That's all from me for now, Daniel.
All right, thank you for being out there for us, Ji-won. We appreciate it. Washington is pushing to make the most out of the upcoming summit with Pyongyang, as the Trump administration has been struggling to make much progress on their denuclearization talks since the maiden meeting in Singapore. The world would be closely watching what agreements can be reached. For details, let's turn to our Kang.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Washington aims to achieve as much as possible in regards to North Korea's complete denuclearization at the second summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump in Vietnam at the end of February. Speaking at a security conference in Poland on Thursday local time, Pompeo added that's not the only goal Washington hopes to accomplish.
We are aiming to get as far down the road as we can in what's now a couple of weeks. That's not just along the denuclearization pillar of what they agreed to in Singapore, what the two leaders agreed to in Singapore. We'll certainly talk about how we foster reduce tension, reduce military risk, take down that risk so that we can get peace and security on the peninsula as well.
When asked in a later Fox News interview about how important the formal end of the Korean War is in the negotiations, Pompeo said it's something that has been discussed a lot and that a team of U.S. officials will travel to Asia this weekend to continue conversations about the issues that were discussed in the Singapore summit last June. But during an interview with CBS News on Wednesday, the U.S. Secretary of State pointed out that it's time for Kim Jong-un to deliver on his promise of complete denuclearization. Also mentioning the phrase trust but verify, Pompeo added that the U.S. must be able to verify the regime's denuclearization process. Kim and Trump are scheduled to meet for the second time from February 27th to 28th in Hanoi to discuss North Korea's denuclearization in exchange for corresponding measures from the U.S. Negotiators from both sides, including U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun and his counterpart Kim Hyok-chol, met in Pyongyang last week to discuss the summit agenda and logistical details. They're expected to resume their talks next week. Kang, Arirang News.
Seoul and Washington's top diplomats met on the sidelines of an international conference in Poland on Thursday to discuss preparations for the Kim-Trump meeting. According to the nation's foreign ministry, Kang and Mike Pompeo discussed ways to ensure a successful summit and agreed to continue close coordination at all levels of government. The duo also exchanged views on last week's pre-summit talks in Pyongyang, which involved officials from North Korea and the U.S., and reaffirmed their commitment to achieving denuclearization and peace on the peninsula. Amid the convoluted diplomatic situation between Seoul and Tokyo, South Korea's top diplomat sat down about an hour ago for talks with their Japanese counterpart. According to the foreign ministry in Seoul, Kang and Taro Kono met in Munich on the sidelines of an international security conference. Friday morning local time, the two are said to have discussed contentious issues, including compensation for South Koreans who were forced to work for Japanese companies during World War II, the sexual enslavement of Korean women during Japan's colonial rule, as well as their views on Pyongyang's denuclearization ahead of the second Kim-Trump summit. The session comes 23 days later after the ministers last met at the World Economic Forum in Davos back in January. The commander of U.S. forces Korea has reaffirmed that the stationing of American troops on the peninsula does not depend on any peace treaty or lack thereof between the parties to the Korean War. In a statement released Friday afternoon, General Robert Abrams said the Seoul-Washington military alliance is stronger than ever and has been serving as a strategic deterrent to any potential crisis or provocation. The statement came a few days after the commander remarked to the Senate Armed Services Committee that American troops need to stay here until a peace treaty is signed with the North. That prompted speculation that the U.S. might withdraw its forces if a peace deal is signed. So far this year, 10 organizations around the world got the green light to send humanitarian aid items into the North, mainly thanks to America's changing stance on sanctioning the regime. However, South Korea has not been able to deliver Tamiflu across the border. According to our Oh Jung-hee, concerns are rising that Seoul may miss the optimal time frame to administer the drugs.
More and more organizations around the world are getting the okay to provide humanitarian assistance to North Korea, but South Korea is still facing difficulties. In only January this year, 10 aid organizations received exemptions from the UN Security Council's North Korea sanctions to bring humanitarian aid-related items into the North. These include UNICEF, the International Federation of the Red Cross, World Vision International, and other NGOs from several countries. This is in stark contrast to 2018, when there were only 2 such cases. Such a change comes after the U.S. turned positive towards providing humanitarian aid to North Korea late last year. Visiting Seoul for a South Korea-U.S. working group meeting in December, Stephen Biegun, U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, announced,
"Toward that end, upon my return to Washington, D.C. next week, I've been directed by Secretary of State Pompeo to review United States policy on humanitarian assistance provided to the DPRK by private and religious American organizations."
According to Voice of America on Friday, Washington is indeed reviewing its policy on sanctions waivers and travel exemptions. The State Department said the U.S. is deeply concerned about the well-being of the North Korean people. But amid the turnaround, South Korea has struggled to provide its own humanitarian aid to the north. Since late last year, Seoul has planned to provide 200,000 doses of Tamiflu antiviral medication to Pyongyang, but the delivery was delayed as the U.S. reportedly said trucks crossing the border to deliver the drugs could violate UN sanctions. Now the Seoul government says things have been resolved and there are only logistics issues to be sorted out with the north. But there are concerns that as time goes by, Seoul may miss the most effective time to deliver the medication. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
President Moon Jaein highlighted the importance of parliamentary support in institutionalizing the reforms in powerful government agencies. This is something his administration has been placing great emphasis on in order to create a fairer country. Shin Se-min shares with us his remarks.
Following up on a campaign pledge from 3 years ago, President Moon Jaein is calling for a speedy reform of the country's most powerful agencies to tighten up the system of checks and balances. President Moon said comprehensively overhauling agencies like the prosecution, the police, and the intelligence service is not an issue of politics, but a necessity.
국정원, 검찰, 경찰 개혁은 정권의 이익이나 정략적 차원의 문제가 아닙니다. 민주공화국의 가치를 바로 세우는 시대적 과제입니다.
Speaking to the heads of the most powerful government agencies, the president noted that the country's intelligence service voluntarily closed its department dealing with domestic affairs, which had been politicized under the previous administrations. But, he said, more needs to be done.
국민의 명령은 분명합니다. 반칙과 특권이 없는 나라. 일상에서 어떤 불공정이나 조그마한 부조리도 결코 용납하지 않는 사회를 원하고 있습니다.
The president said this should be the year in which Korea escapes the shadow of past corruption in the halls of power and roots out the corrupt practices left behind by the Japanese occupation and its collaborators in the prosecution and police. And above all, the president asked for the support of the National Assembly in institutionalizing their reforms so that the mechanism of checks and balances works smoothly among the various agencies, including the top office. In the hope that these reforms take root, the president ordered his administration to look for ways, in addition to legislation, to maximize its ability to see the changes through. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The government released the latest edition of a monthly economic report. Sliding exports and the sluggish job figures stood out. Kim Ji-yeon zooms in on February's greenbook.
The Ministry of Economy and Finance expressed its concerns over Korea's outbound shipments as the volume of exports dropped on year for the second straight month in January. According to the ministry's monthly greenbook report released Friday, the country's exports dipped 1.3% on year in December and fell again by around 6% on year last month, with telecommunications, computers, and semiconductors all seeing big drops. The government refrained from commenting on its effect on the local economy, but stated Korea's investment and exports are going through changes due to growing external uncertainties with the U.S.-China trade tensions, as well as Britain leaving the European Union and waning demand for Korea's main export item, semiconductors. Facility investment also slumped for the second straight month in December last year by 0.4% on month. For 4 months leading up to January, the government has stated in its Green Book that the country's exports saw a steady increase, mainly due to the semiconductor boom.
The root cause of dwindling demand for semiconductors and smartphones comes from signs of a slowing global economy. In particular, the economies of the US and China continued to slow last year. Economic prospects were further blackened by the trade disputes between the two biggest economies.
The greenbook pointed out that job growth is sluggish, with the unemployment rate reaching a monthly record high in January, surpassing 1.2 million people, mainly due to a slump in the manufacturing sector. It stated, though, that consumption and retail sales had both expanded for the third consecutive month. Consumer sentiment also rose 0.6 points from the previous month to the 97.5 level last month. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Data by Bank of Korea shows household debt increased by $1 billion on month in January, slowing down from a $3.8 billion gain in December. But it still is one of the biggest risks to the economy. For more on why this is such a big problem and what could be done to drive down debt, here's Kim Hae-sung with an in-depth analysis.
Korea's household debt has doubled since 2008, topping $1.34 trillion as of the third quarter of last year. That's about the size of the country's GDP. The Bank of Korea says between 2008 and 2016, household debt minus income growth grew at 3.1% a year, 8 times faster than the average of OECD countries. According to the Bank for International Settlements, Korea's household debt increased the second fastest in the world in the second quarter of 2018, trailing just behind China. This ballooning debt is attributed to slower economic growth, low interest rates that encourage borrowing, and Korea's deregulation of the housing market, which took effect in 2014, triggering a nationwide buying spree.
If people can borrow money, use it for their businesses, make a profit and pay it back, that's not in itself a problem. But debt has outstripped the growth in household income of around 4 to 5%, and debt borrowed by lower income people can cause instability in the financial system when they're unable to pay it back.
Figures differ, but one by the central bank shows lower income people, those in the bottom 30%, borrowed more than $76 billion, and more than 1.5 million people took out loans from 3 or more financial institutions.
The 2008 global financial crisis was sparked in the U.S. by a sharp increase in high-risk mortgages that went into default. Korea's household debt is not as bad as that. But if triggered by some economic shock and people can't pay what they owe, this debt could potentially drive down consumption and cause banks to rapidly become insolvent.
The government's housing regulations, including a tax rise that went into effect last September and the BOK's rate hike, has helped slow down borrowing. But slowdown in domestic and global economic growth will make it difficult to reduce the debt. Experts say it's more important than ever to rein in the debt increase, improve banks' fiscal soundness, and come up with supportive measures like longer maturities to help low-income people especially pay back their loans. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
Cab rides in Seoul will be more expensive starting Saturday. It's the first fare hike in half a decade. Reactions, as you might expect, have been quite different from passengers and drivers. Lee Min-sun help us look beyond the numbers.
The new fares take effect on Saturday at 4 a.m. The base fare is going up almost 27% to 3,800 won, or about $3.40. It's the first increase since October 2013. People in Korea have gotten used to taxis being relatively cheap over the years. So even though drivers have promised better service, some people are unhappy about the higher fares.
As a student, this is a huge increase. It would be good if they improved their service, but there's no one to check, so it's hard to make sure that happens.
It's about time that taxi fares go up, but it seems rather sudden. I'll take public transportation more. They've always talked about improving their service, but it's never really happened.
It might seem logical to expect better service if you're paying more, but drivers say even with the increase, the fares aren't very high.
It's still nothing compared to other countries. If passengers want better service, then they should pay more. Regular taxi drivers will do just as they've always done and keep refusing passengers.
When taxi fares go up, we lose passengers for a while. But I will always try to provide better service, not just because the fare has risen.
The Seoul Private Taxi Association has promised better service in exchange for the higher pay, like keeping their cars cleaner, drivers not smoking in the car, and putting more taxis on the streets at night. But many people aren't convinced they will. The city government says it will check up on their service and has already taken various measures. Recently, it penalized 22 taxi companies caught refusing passengers. It also plans to introduce taxis that are for women only. Meanwhile, the province of Gyeonggi-do, which surrounds the capital, is also looking at increasing its base fare for the first time in 5 years. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
Gloomy skies and face masks have become the norm in recent months here in the nation, which is why the government is introducing a special act to reduce fine dust emissions. It involves banning select vehicles from hitting the road on certain days. Hong Yu provides some valuable tips on what drivers need to stay updated on.
The Special Fine Dust Reduction Act, in effect from Friday, banned all diesel cars from the roads on days when the average density of ultra-fine dust is above 50 micrograms per cubic meter for 2 consecutive days. Those caught driving a diesel car registered before December 2005 will be fined around $100. There are detection devices on certain major roads, and this time the ban will be enforced in all 17 cities and provinces. This is a junkyard in Gyeonggi-do province, and it's full of cars ready for scrapping. Most of them have been registered for early scrapping, as the government plans to expand its range of regulated vehicles to include all diesel and patrol cars starting from June 1st in its effort to curb pollution.
About 15 old diesel cars get scrapped every day here. That's about 15% more than before the government started this plan to reduce fine dust.
But getting rid of an old car to get a new one is not only a pain, it costs money. To help people, the government is offering financial support in the form of a subsidy for a new car or a device that can be attached to reduce emissions. If buying a new car is a problem, then the second option might be good since the government pays for 90% of the device. The Environment Ministry says this special act can reduce fine dust by 19,000 tons a year, but there are some doubts.
The problem is the exhaust reducing device only works for 3 years. To keep it working longer requires a checkup from time to time. The government needs to help in this regard in terms of money and technology.
This year, the Environment Ministry expects the fine dust emergency measures will be issued about 9 times, so it's important that drivers stay up to date. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
Sports ministers from Seoul and Pyongyang are meeting with the International Olympic Committee president in Switzerland. Expectations are high. Talks will lead to more joint events and inter-Korean squads being formed. Won Jong-han fills us in on some of the expected topics.
Sports chiefs from the two Koreas are meeting with IOC head Thomas Bach to discuss further inter-Korean sporting ties in the future. They are discussing the fielding of joint teams at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, as well as a bid to co-host the 2032 Summer Olympics. On Thursday, South Korean officials met separately with the IOC president to discuss unified Olympic teams for next year. And Lee Gi-heung, head of the South Korean sporting body, has said the two sides are likely to combine teams in women's basketball, women's field hockey, rowing, and judo in Tokyo next year. However, he also stated that the meeting on Friday could lead to joint teams in other sports too, mentioning table tennis and handball as two possible areas for cooperation. One other topic at Friday's meeting is the recent decision by the World Anti-Doping Agency to declare North Korea non-compliant with the World Anti-Doping Code. Last September, the agency said it will declare North Korea non-compliant if the regime did not resolve problems in the implementation of its testing program within 4 months. But the deadline passed in January without any action from North Korea, resulting in the regime becoming non-compliant. That recent decision could limit North Korean athletes' participation at international events, including the Olympics, possibly hindering the fielding of joint teams at Tokyo 2020. The three-way meeting will give North Korea the chance to offer further explanation and hopefully find a resolution to the matter so that the two Koreas could continue their efforts to compete together in the global sporting arena. 원정한 아리랑 뉴스.
Time to turn to Michelle back at the Weather Center for the updates you'll need. Michelle, it's been practically snowing all day long here in Korea. I guess I'm no longer a kid at heart. I'm still wondering, how much more are we expecting?
Well, so I advise you to be extra careful on the roads during your commute back home, as it's snowing again and it's expected to snow all throughout the night. The central region will receive up to 3 centimeters of more snow, while the Chungcheong provinces are forecast to get some flurries. Saturday will be bright and sunny in the country. However, dust concentrations might temporarily rise, so stay updated with the air quality forecast. And the surrounding Northeast Asian countries will also see fine weather. Taking a look at our temperature readings in detail, Seoul will start today at -4 degrees Celsius, Gwangju at 0, while Busan and Jeju Island starts in the positive territory. The clouds are expected to clear up by mid-afternoon, raising the mercury up to 2 degrees in Seoul and to 8 degrees in Busan. Mild conditions will continue into next week with another possible chance of precipitation on Tuesday. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
This is coming in. The IOC has approved forming joint team for the two Koreas in 4 sporting categories, including basketball and judo. We'll have more updates in our later newscast. That's all we could squeeze into tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Thank you for watching. Have an incredible weekend.